Okay, so I just wanted to make a recording of Reagan and the 80s. Now, I'm going to try and get to all this stuff in class, but we might get cut off. So I just wanted to have it out there just in case. And also for people who may be absent or if you have other APs or something, just want to make sure everybody can get this. So this PowerPoint is on Canvas. I didn't make this PowerPoint, but that's nice. I didn't make this PowerPoint, sorry. I am going to let this dog out. Hold on. Stop it. Go. I didn't make this, but it's a good one. So I'm going to skip through some things, but we'll go through it. So basically, Reagan is in 1980, he's going to run for president against Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was the incumbent, meaning he was the existing president. And Reagan is going to win by a lot because we know in the 70s there was stagflation and a lot the energy crisis, and people were kind of disgusted with the way Jimmy Carter handled that. So to understand Reagan and his success, like why he wins the election so easily, is you have to go back a lot actually, to even like back to Johnson with the Great Society and the War on Poverty and the Vietnam War. All of those things are very costly, and they cause a deficit. And then you couple that with the stagflation that Nixon and Ford and Carter experienced. So the economy is kind of rough. Now, Johnson was a Democrat. Nixon was a Republican. And then, of course, so is Ford. Gerald Ford was his vice president. And then you have Carter. They think Carter's going to change things. He's a Democrat, and the economy is still stagnant, and there's still a lot of inflation, still a lot of unemployment. And so then you see Reagan come in, and they want to see if he can maybe change things up. Okay. Um, and also to girls, don't forget there's a huge distrust of government. People felt like during the Vietnam War, the government was lying to them. And also too, then you have the Watergate scandal with Nixon, and then you have Gerald Ford pardons him. So it looks like, all the politicians are just kind of covering for each other and doing shady things. I mean, that really wasn't the case. Certainly what Nixon did with Watergate wasn't right, but Ford thought he was doing the right thing by just giving him a pardon so the country could move on and try and heal. Okay, so all that stuff's going on, so people are feeling that way. Then they feel like the economy is just terrible. So it's kind of tough, and it lays the groundwork for some new thoughts. And there's a big push for conservatism. During this time period, you had Roe v. Wade, which is the abortion case, and that it makes abortion legal. That's 1972. You have a lot of things going on where people want to get back to, I guess, the counterculture movement in the 1960s, people speaking out against the government. I think people are at this point where they want to get back to what they think is like Christian values, and there's talk of like prayer in public school. There's talk of overturning Roe v. Wade. People want to get back to things. Reagan was a very patriotic person, and he wants things to be, now granted, in his personal life he was divorced and remarried, but he wanted to uphold traditional American values in this country, and what he felt was the Christian type things like prayer in public school and stuff like that. Now that doesn't happen, but that was just a thought that he had. So the 60s and 70s give rise to a push for conservatism, which we'd seen before in the 50s, and now it's coming back. Okay, so here's a good chart that shows kind of the difference between the right and the left. What we see in the 80s is a move toward the new right. So it's a new conservative push. You saw a lot of people that were maybe more leftist, the people who opposed the war. So it's funny, girls, I know you think I'm probably obsessed with the baby boomers. I'm always talking about them, but those baby boomers that were born right after World War II, that were in the late 60s and early 70s, in their late teens, early 20s, and were protesting Vietnam and very anti-government. Now, those are the people who have families. They're married with kids, and they're the ones bringing up their families. And they might be leaning now more toward the conservative side because they do want their taxes cut. They do want more employment and less unemployment, they do want good values. So you do see those people, maybe some of them, I'm not saying everyone, some of them maybe shift their values a little bit to the right now. So what we see in the right, what Reagan's agenda is, and what a lot of people at that time who were fans of his might be thinking is that they want, now think of, remember when we did the cartoon with Calvin Coolidge playing the saxophone for Big Business? Reagan, if he were able, he would do the same thing, okay? He would be the same kind of guy where you let big business do their thing. In fact, leading up to this, you saw a lot of regulation of government in the 70s. So Nixon creates the Environmental Protection Agency. And with a lot of things going on in business with Carter and with Nixon, there was a big push on controlling business and making them have a lot of regulations. Okay, so now if you have the EPA and you have a business, you have to do a lot more steps in order to get rid of maybe the waste from your factory or whatever. So there's a lot of extra things that are probably costly to you. Just all of this regulation of business by government is something that the people on the far right don't like. So Reagan would be on the far right, and he is pro big business. He's definitely pro big business, and he's pro deregulation. Okay, he's like, just let business, play that saxophone, let business do their own thing, and things will trickle down. He believes in something called trickle down economics. It actually comes to be known as Reaganomics. And he thinks that if he gives tax cuts to the wealthiest people and to big business, it will trickle, that money that those individuals would have spent on taxes will trickle down into the people. We've seen that before with Hoover with the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Okay, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it might, but sometimes it doesn't. But that is what his thought is at the moment. Okay. So he would be one to support free trade. He would support the owners of businesses. Okay, he wants economic freedom, and he is for those kinds of things. Where people on the left, the more liberals, may be more in favor of the individual workers. Okay, and for personal liberties. Okay. All right. All right, so guys, remember the New Deal? I told you the New Deal, what does the New Deal do? The New Deal makes government bigger. It makes the relationship that government has with the individual much more intimate. When you lose your job now, you turn to the federal government and you look for unemployment compensation, okay? Government became so much bigger since the 1940s, even the 30s, in the 1930s with the New Deal, and then with the World War II, all of the government spending. So Reagan wants to reduce the size. It was really important to him to reduce the size of the federal government. He really wants to do that. He's all for spending on military. Don't forget, this is the Cold War. He's very much into spending money on the military and on strategic defense, but he does not want to spend money on social welfare programs. And we're going to see that he's going to cut some of the social welfare programs that were put in place by previous presidents. Okay, so like LBJ and the Great Society and the War on Poverty cost a lot of money. Okay, caused a deficit. Okay, and no, Reagan's going to cause a deficit too, but while he's president, he makes things good economically. He wants to promote family values, and what people. So people in the 60s and 70s girls is a time, the 1970 is the first gay pride parade. It's women pushing to be in the workplace. It's people, all kinds of people who might not fit into what somebody feels is like the in the 1980s might feel is not what they consider to be the typical or ideal family, were disturbed by this. They see this as like a decline in morality, and they want to get back to like traditional family values and like Christian type values. Like I was saying before, they don't like the idea of abortion. They don't like the idea of not having prayer in public school. They want to get, which never changes. You don't do that separation of church and state, but they want to do, they want to see changes in those places. Okay. So there's some of the things that they want very much, strict on crime. They want, tougher punishments for crime. They don't like homosexuality. The 1980s give rise to the AIDS epidemic, and AIDS gets to be, uh, gosh, sorry. AIDS is has a stigma, is what I want to say, because it has the stigma of only being sorry, let him out, Julia. Only being a disease, and that's not true. Other people could certainly get it from. It's definitely a sexually transmitted disease, but it's also a disease that can be transmitted by sharing needles with drug use, or by people like hemophiliacs, or somebody in the hospital can get it. But it got a stigma with it, and people who were critics of Reagan would say that he did not do enough with AIDS because they saw it as, sorry, I'm going to leave this like this so I can see the time. He didn't do enough with it because it had the stigma of being only a disease that afflicted gay men. So it didn't get as much attention. There was a lot of homelessness. A lot of those guys who were homeless were Vietnam vets that maybe had PSTD and were struggling or whatever. There was a large amount of homelessness in the United States during the 1980s, while other people were prospering. People were without homes, and people felt Reagan didn't do enough for that. But that's just another thing that gets him. So people, the new right, this is what they're looking at, the things that are here. They want to stimulate business, and they want to strengthen national defense. So they'll spend, that's it. That's what they were criticizing. Critics of Reagan would say, oh, he's going to spend all this money on defense, but what about the social problem? So you have a very far right, and they're with Reagan, and then you have the other side who is critical of Reagan, saying he's not doing enough for social issues. Okay. What happened to the thing with, okay, so this is Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell was a personality, like a TV evangelist is what he was. And he was actually, he was very outspoken. At one point, I think he becomes involved in politics in Minnesota. I want to say he was the mayor, not the mayor, maybe the governor of Minnesota. But he was extremely far right. And he forms a group that's called the Moral Majority, and it's a lot of people who are for what he considers to be traditional family values, and he's extremely conservative. In fact, at one point, this is ridiculous, but what I remember about him from like the 80s and 90s was that he, I don't know if you guys remember the show, oh, what the heck were they called, those things? It was like Tinky Winky and I have to ask my daughter what those things were. They were like little guys, and they were like different colors, and I think the one was either pink or purple, and he had a triangle was his symbol, and he said, this was a little kid show for like little toddlers, and he said, oh, that one's supposed to be gay, and what are we teaching people? Like he went on this crazy tangent about that, and that's what I remember about him. That's the only thing I remember about him. But he did form the group called the Moral Majority, and you know, that was his thing, and that was certainly within his right to say. But people were starting to get a little bit, you know, concerned about what he was saying there with that one particular story. It was kind of odd, but he certainly had a following, and it was the Moral Majority, and they were people who were very far to the right. Okay. All right, so that's the story there. What else? Okay, lower taxes, less government, and family values. Okay. All right, so also too, guys, that's all domestic stuff. Foreign policy wise, Reagan is going to come in, and he's going to have a lot to deal with the Iran hostage crisis. The Iranians are going to release the hostages the day that Reagan is inaugurated. They're going to release them, which is kind of thumbing their nose at Carter. They hated Carter, and but Reagan has a lot to deal with on the world stage as well. Okay. Oh, wow. He really won by a landslide. Less government. Okay. So he reduces Medicaid. Remember we said Medicaid was put in place by Lyndon B. Johnson. It was part of the Great Society. And what else does he do? Oh, he does too. Yeah. He puts a lot of good people in the Supreme Court, namely the first female. All right, I want to stop here and then probably have to pick it up with one more.